Hi, I'm Dr. Jay Sutliffe, registered dietitian for Optimize for Life. Today I want to talk to you about some of the things you can do to be successful at maintaining a lifestyle that's conducive for health and wellness and optimum living. The first thing we want to look at when related to nutrition and those types of things is I want you to think about the food environments that you encounter on a regular basis. Think about your home, maybe where you work, school, social environments, places where you consume food or prepare food on a regular basis, and think about those environments. Are they actually generating a positive environment so you can be successful? You need to be very intentional when you're making lifestyle change. If we're not intentional, our half-hearted, kind of haphazard approaches often set us up for failure. So think about this. First of all, what kind of environment do you live in? Are there a lot of candy dishes? Are there foods in your areas that you do not want to be consuming? The thing I'll try to do is have you think about purging those areas and getting rid of any of the food that's setting you up for failure. Now, this may be a difficult situation when you live with other people who are not following the same lifestyle that you desire. So think about it. If, as much as possible, purge and eliminate the foods in the food environments that you live and work in on a regular basis. Get rid of those. And so what you're going to have to do is look at your home environment. Maybe it's in your car. You have some food stashed away in your glove compartments, or maybe it's a gym bag or somewhere in your purse or somewhere that you frequent on a regular basis. You need to get rid of these foods that are setting us up for failure. A lot of times people will say, I'm just going to hang on to a little bit of this so I can have an occasional treat. We often find that people that do that are not very successful. The next thing I want you to do is think about the environments at work, at your desks, in your cars, all these different things. They have to be, in a sense, purged of foods that do not belong, or just replace them. Replace them with the foods that you want to consume on a regular basis. Think about the other environments that you frequent on a regular basis. And you look at, maybe it's a certain desk, a certain coworker always has food out on their desk, or maybe it's walking through a food court at a mall or something like that. Some places you may just have to avoid entirely. In other places, you just want to replace those foods and put foods in those areas that you want to consume on a regular basis that are actually health promoting and not health destroying. So once you've done that, you're now setting yourself up to be successful. The next thing you want to do is you start looking at the environment where you're going to prepare your food and store your food on a regular basis. You need to have designated space in those areas, especially at home, where you can actually store your food and it can be your food. If you live with other people, again, that are not following the lifestyle that you want to follow, you're going to need to communicate with them that you have specific designated areas and containers that you can store your food in. So you can have a specific area so there's not a, quotes, cross-contamination of other people's food with your food. But the key here is whether you're sharing space or not, you want to communicate to your friends, your family, that you're actually making a lifestyle change and you'd appreciate their support. So communication is the key. Next, look at specific areas where you can have cupboards or certain counter space or places in the fridge or freezer where you can have your food. If you live alone, it's sometimes easier, but if you're sharing an environment where there's foods and people and things that are not necessarily conducive to your success, you're going to want to communicate that, and you're also going to have designated area. So specific areas, specific containers. Now let's talk a little bit about those spaces. The space where you want to store your food and where you're going to be doing your preparation, you want to have easily accessible containers and areas where you're going to be able to get your food out of. Ideally, it would be well lit. And here's something to think about. Cool, dry places. A cooler area, because a lot of these foods that are shelf stable and things like that, you still want to have them in an area where it's cool. Secondly, you don't want to have them right by direct sunlight from windows that have a lot of sunlight coming in and it's going to heat up that area. You also want to make sure it's away from heat vents, like if you have a heat source in your house, maybe a heat duct. You don't want to have food storage right around those areas there. And so, first of all, we want to clean out and purge our areas, get rid of the foods we don't want, give them to a food pantry, or if you don't feel good about that, make sure that you give away your food to a food bank or maybe people that would appreciate it. But basically get it out of your zone and where you're going to frequent on a regular basis. Secondly, we're thinking about storage containers, nice cool dry areas and specific areas where you can do your food storage. And so those are the two things to help set you up for our next segment, where we'll be discussing these three areas of your cupboards, your refrigerator, and your freezer, and how we'll have a list to stock those areas. Okay, now what we want to look at is the three areas for stocking our pantry. You might want to take a piece of paper and divide it into three sections. And the first section we'll talk about is dry goods, dried storage goods. So we have this stocking the pantry list, dry goods at the top, and we see that this is a standard ingredient list of things we want to have on hand on a regular basis. In this area, you want to have staple items, and I brought some out here. I'm going to show you some chia seeds and maybe some flax seeds. And so when we see these going down or starting to get lower and lower in our stock, then we know we need to restock those. And then we always make sure that we have some grains on hand, maybe like quinoa. And then we have some dry beans that we like to use a pressure cooker to cook those. And if you're in a pinch for time, then we just make sure that we have some canned beans on hand and rinse them well. So this all is going to show up in your dry goods section of your stocking list and so forth. Then we also have like the wild rice and the brown rice. We have some almond butter, some peanut butter, and those types of things. These are all dry goods that go together and they store in a cool, dry place. Now some of these things, like our flax seeds and different things in our nuts, like our walnuts and our sunflower seeds and our pumpkin seeds and things like that, we like to store those in glass in the refrigerator so that they keep for a longer period of time. So these are the dry goods, and again, we make sure we have them on a permanent list, and when we see that they're going down, we transfer those to our shopping list. So these are the staple items that show up in our dry goods section. Also in the dry goods section is a good assortment of some seasonings. Like we make our own chicken style seasoning for our soups and different dressings and things like that. Your dried herbs, those types of seasonings, you want to make sure that those are in a cool, dry place, maybe in the refrigerator as well. And the thing about the dry goods, specifically with the seasonings, we want to make sure that we're not buying super large quantities of these, because they, in a sense, can lose their flavors and can maybe even lose some of their power in your foods. And a lot of times you'll see recipes call for a certain amount of dry seasoning, and you put some in and you don't taste it very well. It could be that your seasonings are getting old. So again, keep those out of the direct sunlight from the windows or directly from heat ducts and things like that, and keep them in a cool place. And sometimes your recipes, you have to increase the amount of dry seasonings you use, because either they're losing their flavor or their punch. So again, this is the dry section. Section 1 is the dry section of staple items you have on hand, and just have an assortment there. And some of these are occasional foods, some of these are staple everyday items. And always try maybe some dried fruit would be in here as well. Like we have some dates here. I like to throw a few dates in on some things, maybe to add a little sweetener, or maybe even eat them whole as they are. So these are the dry foods, and hopefully you can stock those and put them on the top section of your sheet, and keep these on hand so that you have them on a regular basis. And maybe even want to have some of these stored at work, or maybe somewhere else where you frequent on a regular basis. So that's the dry goods. Next, we're going to go to the refrigerator and the freezer sections of our stocking the pantry list. Section 2 of our pantry and stocking the cupboard list, we want to look at refrigerated items. Now this is where we're going to start looking at really, this is the nuts and bolts of a plant-based diet. We want to look at fresh produce. Okay? Obviously some of this can sit out on your counter while it's still ripening, or it's between being picked and being consumed. But a lot of times we want to look at storing these foods in our refrigerator. Always want to have plenty of green vegetables on hand, and specifically we want to talk about is the green leafy vegetables. We want to talk about kale and romaine, spinach, and those types of foods. The most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. Maybe throw in some sprouts and those types of things. But these are staple items. Always have plenty of greens on hand, and also some of the other complementary vegetables, some of the root vegetables, some of the nightshades and things like that. So we've got this seasonal foods here. We have some zucchini and summer squash, some avocados, tomatoes. We always want to have those nutrient-dense foods readily available, because if it's not in the house, we can't consume it. So these foods need to show up on section 2 of the refrigeration section of your sheet, of your stocking your pantry list. And so we look at always having those on hand, an assortment of vegetables. Secondly, we also want to look at, and even though in the refrigeration section, these don't always show up in the refrigerator, especially the bananas, we look at always having plenty of fresh fruit on hand as well. Always like to have some bananas on hand, and when they get overly ripe, we can basically take them and we can peel them off, and then we can put them in bags and put them in the refrigerator, and then, in the freezer. Just put them in the freezer, and then we can use them for smoothies or sorbets and things like that. So I always like to have some bananas on hand. And then we have some seasonal fruit. Here we have some mangoes, some pears, some peaches, some kiwi. Always a nice assortment of those in the refrigerator. And again, we'll talk about a little bit more about the produce and things like that when we get to the freezer section. And also when we talk about the refrigeration section, I always like to have an assortment of maybe you want to have some almond milk or soy milk or whatever type of beverage or something. We use these typically if we're going to have a little bit of cereal to put a little moisture in there. Or we put them in the blender to be the base for a smoothie. And occasionally we like to use some yogurt as a kind of a seasoning or as a kind of a dessert item. And maybe we'll put some flaxseed in there and those types of things. Some more of the items that we have in the staple item of the refrigerator. Don't use a lot of it. We have a little bit of Vegenaise to kind of bring some moisture to sandwiches or types of things like that. And also like to include a little bit of this Earth Balance. It's like a butter spread. We like to use that on like bagels or bread of that nature, things like that. And again, our nuts often show up with the seeds, and they're often in the refrigeration section in our home. Okay, so that's kind of the refrigerator, and sometimes you want to put your almond butter and your peanut butter and those types of things, store those in the refrigerator for a longer keeping. But all of these foods show up on your basic pantry list that you're going to be shopping with for the refrigeration section. Now we're going to transition right into the freezer section of our list. So now section 1 was the dry goods. Secondly, we're looking at the refrigeration section. Now the third section on your little pantry list is you want to start looking at what are the staple items there. Now, interestingly enough, we buy a lot of frozen fruit, and we use these a lot of times for smoothies, and we also use it for making pies and sorbets and things like that. And what we find is that seasonal fruit can be very economical, but when you get out of season, a lot of times blueberries and even cherries get very expensive when they're fresh. The frozen food section is a great way to stock up on foods, have them on hand, and then they keep for a long period of time. Now, the nutritional value of the frozen food is almost as good as fresh picked right out of the garden. In fact, it's even more nutritious if the food was picked ripe and then frozen to keep it robust and healthy. And so what we look at is we always make sure we have some frozen fruit on hand for our smoothies and sorbets, like I said. And then we also look at, we get some vegetables in season, maybe overstocked. These are yellow and red peppers. And we took them, and they were very, very ripe, and so they were going to spoil, so we cut them up into strips, and we'll use these in our stir fries with the rest of the vegetables. So those are some foods that will end up on a staple item list for us in our freezer. And then what else we like to always have on hand, too, is maybe some sprouted grain breads, such as this from Silver Hills. Excellent bread. And so we keep this in the freezer. We occasionally use it for sandwiches and other things like that. We'll also take it out and cut it up into squares and use it for croutons in our salads. So these are some of the items that show up in our freezer section. We also like to have some tortillas on hand, some whole grain tortillas, so that we can make burritos and other types of fajitas and those types of items. But that kind of gives you an idea of breaking up a piece of paper into 3 sections: your dry foods, your refrigerated items, and your freezer items. If you stock your pantry with these items and have them on hand on a regular basis, you're going to be more successful at making the lifestyle change and sticking with it. So again, let's review. You want to purge out the foods that do not belong in your area. Have designated areas where you're going to store your food. Maybe glass containers would be ideal. And then next we look at stocking the pantry and having a regular list. And maybe it goes on the refrigerator. Okay, and you have sections in there: dry foods, refrigerated foods, and frozen foods. And those items, when you see them starting to go down in supply, when they start dropping down in the amount you have left, you know that you need to transfer that to your shopping list. At another time, we're going to talk about how you actually shop and actually navigate the grocery store. But hopefully this is inspirational for you. And again, make sure that you always have plenty of this fresh produce on hand so that you can throw together quick salads, good fruit salads, good green salads, some stir fries, some soups. And you can live a life that optimizes for life. Thank you.